Welcome to Cultivating Peace, a symposium on violence prevention. I'm Jim Hudden. I'm a professor of sociology and the director of the Center for Peace Studies and Violence Prevention here at Virginia Tech. Before we get really started, I'd like to thank the people who've made this possible. I'd like to recognize the Lacey Foundation for their continued generous support, without which we wouldn't be here. Also like to thank Dean Suat Rollins, the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences, for her continued support. And certainly the people who actually did the legwork for this, Amy Splitt, the office manager and grant coordinator for the center, and Professor Mark Luck of the philosophy department, an affiliate of the center. I'd like to thank them, and certainly the staff here at Virginia Tech. I'm sure you will find that their hospitality is as splendid as the facility. So thank all of you. Cultivating peace. Indeed, we need to do this. We live in a violent world, and we're reminded of this daily. As violence spills onto our streets, into our homes, our schools, our movie theaters, as it threatens communities and rips at the social fabric of nations and groups, and threatens our very existence at the global level. We need to cultivate peace. And the Center for Peace Studies and Violence Prevention, born out of our own tragedy here, is dedicated to trying to build a better world. One not only with less violence, but with more peace. And we do this in three ways. We do it through research, as our faculty and affiliates are engaged in partnerships around the globe, researching the causes and consequences of violence in hopes to finding solutions. We study violence at the interpersonal level, at domestic violence, crime, rebellion, revolution, terrorism, warfare, genocide. And we also study structural violence, the violence that is embedded in the system, that prevents people from achieving their full potential. Inequalities, prejudices, the degradation of our environment. A second way that we do this is through education. One thing that we know for sure is that we don't have the answers. We also know that violence is easy, but peace is hard work. And if we don't continue the efforts of those who've come before us, those efforts will be for naught. So we need to educate the next generation of peace scholars, people who will take the mantle of peace and push what we know, learning more, and carrying this forward. And we do it through outreach, by trying to disseminate. Research and education is wonderful, but if it stays within the hallways of the academy, its power is limited. We need to reach out to the community. We need to bridge form a community of scholars, of students, of community members, of organizations who together can cultivate pathways to peace. And our student symposium that we are hosting here now integrates those three pillars of peace. It is about research. We bring scholars, young scholars from across the country and around the world here to present their ideas, to challenge us, and to give them a forum, a highlight, where they can express their ideas. For young people often have very insightful perspectives on violence because all too often they are the ones who bear the brunt of violence. So we want to give them a forum where their voices can be heard and their research can be highlighted. It is obviously about education. Not only will we offer workshops in methods of conflict mediation and reconciliation that have been successfully implemented in hundreds of conflicts around the world, but we will provide a forum for these students to discuss their ideas and to share their ideas with their peers. And it is about outreach. Not only are you invited to this public the talk tonight, but you're also invited to the presentations over the weekend. I encourage you to come and hear the students present their research. And of course, it's about building a community. It's about the students meeting each other and forming, hopefully, partnerships and friendships that will allow us to expand that community of scholars dedicated to cultivating peace. So our student symposium brings together these three pillars. And I therefore find it very fitting that tonight's keynote speaker is Professor Johann Galtung. For his body of work over nearly 6 decades now embodies research, education, and outreach. Professor Galtung received his first PhD in mathematics in 1956, his second in sociology in 1957, and after which he embarked on, by any imagination, is a remarkable career. He started the world's first peace research center in Oslo in 1959, founded the Journal of Peace Studies in 1964. While most scholars strive to learn a discipline, Professor Galtung created one. He is the founder of Peace Studies. He has published over 1,600 articles and 160 books. If you do the math, that averages 28 articles and 3 books a year, every year for over 50 years. Now, not only is that an incredible amount of production, but his work has been incredibly influential. He has introduced seminal concepts into peace studies, such as structural violence and positive and negative peace. He has contributed theoretically to numerous fields, ideas in peace building, ideas in conflict mediation, ideas in peace journalism, to development studies and community sustainability. There is not an area of research that pretends to have something to say about peace that his work has not touched. Yet, he was not only a researcher. He has taught at dozens of universities around the globe, the United States, in France, in Egypt, in Japan, in Argentina, dozens of other countries around the globe. He has taught literally tens of thousands of students. And in his spare time, he managed to do outreach. He has been involved in conflict mediation in well over 100 conflicts around the globe. And indeed, he has a Skype session tomorrow morning involved in a conflict mediation. He has helped find over 100 peace centers and co-founded the organization Transcend, which is a network of over 350 scholars in 60 countries that are dedicated to promoting peace through peaceful action. So Professor Galtung embodies education, research, and outreach. And it is my honor to have our students learn from him. If you will, to introduce the father of peace studies to his great-great-great-grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Professor Johann Galtung.
Thank you indeed, Jim. That was very, very nice of you. I got almost fatigued by listening to what I heard. You see, you think of Jim Holden as a professor. He was my student at University of Virginia at Charlottesville. Of course, a very pleasant memory. And I see grandchildren in front of me. So let me share with you immediately a way of concentrating the outcome of my work during 60 years. And if you now, you see, I didn't know I was going to Virginia Tech. I thought I was going to an ordinary place where they would have a blackboard and a flipboard and things of that kind. But of course that is below the level of Virginia Tech. So I'll be drawing in the air. It's a formula for peace. It took only 60 years to develop it, and you'll get it in 60 seconds. If you are a little bit energetic, you pull out a pen and a slip of paper. If you are of the usual lazy variety, don't do it. You'll forget it quickly. Peace equals a fraction. In the numerator is positive peace. In the denominator is absence of negative peace. Now, positive peace is equity times harmony. I'll define these terms. Equity times harmony. In the denominator, you have trauma times conflict. 4 tasks. And I'm now taking you on a little trip around the world to give examples of where this has been done, and examples where it hasn't been done. But let me first repeat the formula and define the terms. Equity means cooperation for mutual and equal benefit. The 2 words "and equal" are important. Equity. Harmony means emotional resonance. I suffer your suffering, and I feel joy at your joy. Equity is behavioral, something you do. Harmony is emotional, attitudinal, something you feel. They both enter. And if you now look at equity times harmony, it's not a bad formula for a good marriage. The opposite of equity would be patriarchy, for instance. And the opposite of harmony would be intense joy at the partner's suffering, and intense suffering at the partner's joy. I have been mediating quite a number of marriages around the world. And you can say, if you are at that stage, it doesn't look very promising. It's called on the rocks. Well, we can go into that later. But for me, basic, if you are engaged in something called peace studies, it isn't a kind of left-wing variety of international studies. It is trans-level. It's inside a person, between persons, micro-level. Meso-level, between groups in society. The first conflict I mediated was between blacks and whites in Charlottesville, Virginia. My attachment to Virginia comes very much from that. But I have been waiting till I came to the best part of it. You know, you somehow reserve the best for the end. And if you then go on from there, You find the macro level between states, between nations. And states and nations are not the same thing. State is a piece of territory. Nation is a cultural group with a geographical attachment. Then you have the mega level. States writ large, a region. Nation writ large, a civilization. And I'm working on all 4 levels, including peace with nature. So equity times harmony. Not a bad formula for a good marriage, but there is something in the denominator. Watch out. This is where something problematic is lurking. And this is what Jim said in the very beginning, prevention of violence. There are 2 key sources of violence: trauma and unresolved conflict. The trauma from the past and unresolved conflicts are coming up all the time. They're called contradictions. And the Chinese have a saying that there are human beings without contradictions. They're called corpses. Wherever you have organic life, you have contradictions. In other words, there's no such thing as conflict prevention. That would be like preventing heartbeats or something like that. The whole thing is a question of how we handle conflict. So in the denominator you have handling trauma, that's called reconciliation. And handling conflict is called resolution. The methodology is called mediation. You can have it directly between the parties, but very often you need somebody who knows a little bit about it, who could be useful. And the task of the mediator is to help people. I belong to a school thinking that mediation should be a public free service. And the mediator should have a salary and expenses covered. I was once mediating between Ecuador and Peru, the longest lasting war in Latin American history, 54 years. I was sitting in a room having dinner with the Ecuadorian ex-president. It was about 500 square kilometers up in the Andes. We didn't have too much time. And he said something quite kind of nice. Professor Galtung, you have lived a lot in Latin America, you speak Spanish, you are a conflict specialist. How do we draw the border between Ecuador and Peru? 500 square kilometers in the Andes. Didn't have time to do it the way I want to do it, is to have a dialogue with Ecuadorian leaders, dialogue with Peruvian leaders, one at a time. Don't bring them together, for heaven's sake. Get them up at a higher level. Make them, as Americans say, ready for the table. But that table is not a dining table, it's an examination table, so better prepare yourself a little bit. Now, we didn't have that time, so I said, Your Excellency, maybe you don't draw a line called the border. How about administering the territory together? In Spanish, zona biestadal, parque natural. Make it a binational zone with a natural park. You see, when you are communicating in this field, try to get your formula down to 4 words, not more. You can be sure the journalist will just turn it around and insert a not to make longer sentences and things of that kind. And don't assume that politicians have much time to memorize things. 4 words, maximum. If you could get it down to 3 words, even better. 2. He looked at it, he was tasting it, and he said, very creative, Professor Galtung, but too creative. I've been participating in conferences on this one for 30 years. Nobody ever said that. Nobody. Very creative, but too creative. It will take us 30 years to get used to the formula and 30 years to implement it. 60 years, we don't have that time. Well, I could draw the conclusion, not very successful. 3 years later, the peace treaty was signed about the binational zone with a natural park. That was in 1998, 3 years after I had suggested it. What happened in the meantime? Well, I had a big session. I was called into Ecuador. And somebody said, I would like you to meet our leaders. I said, you mean the president, the present president, the prime minister, the foreign minister? No, no, no. Our leaders, the generals and the admirals. You know, presidents come and go, prime ministers come and go, foreign ministers come and go very quickly. The real ones. So I had in front of me 40 of them. Fantastically well-educated people, very white, quite willing to sacrifice indigenous. And there were corresponding people on the Peruvian side. And ahead was to a mediator is a fantastic delight to be cross-examined on his proposal with all kinds of extremely good questions. And I then try to be honest, and I don't know the answer. I say I don't know the answer. But it is very well worth exploring. So maybe one of them said, I like to be hiking high up in the mountains. This was 5,000 meters high. Are you saying that I could hike in the whole territory? Yes, sir. Will I meet Peruvians? Yes, you will. I hate Peruvians. So I said, maybe you could be hiking at 4,500 to 5,000 and the Peruvians at 5,000 to 5,500. He said, look, that's ridiculous. I can get used to Peruvians. They got used to Peruvians, and it worked. When it worked, there wasn't a single note in a newspaper. Journalists are so fed on conflict and violence that they don't know what peace looks like. They don't recognize it. You can drag peace in front of them, and they won't even see it. Peace journalism becomes a major task. We've had made much success in Southeast Asia in that regard. The worst are CNN, ABC, and NBC, financed by the three major arms corporations in the United States of America, meaning that peace news are bad news. Conflict news, excellent, when it matures into some delicious violence. How to get out of that. At that point, Peru had planned, I didn't know it, bombing Quito in Ecuador to make its point. I didn't know that my little sentence avoided that one. I had no idea. It was told to me later. So what's the honorarium you ask for that? Answer, 0. You try to help people. A public service. That's the ideal. It sounds very Nordic, doesn't it? Sort of welfare state-ish. And of course, many Americans will draw the conclusion it cannot be good if you cannot ask for a decent honorarium. There must be something wrong about it. Okay, go ahead. Waste billions of dollars, billions in Afghanistan and Iraq for nothing. And I'll now tell you how you could have solved Afghanistan. Do I do that with esprit des escaliers, as the French said, in retrospect, retroactively? Not at all. Transcend had a mediation in February 2001. Not in Afghanistan. It was very Taliban run by a hideous regime. It was in Peshawar, just across the border into Pakistan. But let me now make a little point. Did I say cross the border? Yes, I did. Who drew that border? A British colonial officer called Duran. the Juran line. And I can tell you one thing, and I see a nodding head in front of me. If you don't know this, you know nothing about Afghanistan. Just absolutely nothing. The Juran line cut into Pashtun territory, the biggest nation without a state in the world, 40 million people. When they cross from Pakistan into Afghanistan, they're not crossing anything at all. Can a British colonial officer dictate, write a script for how we are thinking? Well, that's what the Anglos think. They think that they dictate the scripts for the world. They don't. Nor do the Americans. So we had it in Peshawar on Pashtun territory. Mediation. There were 100 people in the room. They were organized in 10 dialogue tables, and they were given tasks by me. We were 4 people from Transcend. Me and 3 Canadians, and 3 Canadians, and then 1 Canadian Afghan, who had been sitting 3 years in prison under the communist regime, and come out firmly convinced that what we Afghans are very poor at is to solve conflict. So this was about conflict resolution. 10 tables, 3 for former politicians, cabinet members mainly, 1 prime minister, 3 for sheikhs, and 3 for professors who were totally useless. Why are professors useless? And amn't I one myself? Well, I am. But you see, a typical professorial problem would be, how does this relate to Michel Foucault? How does this relate to Jürgen Habermas? Now, these are wonderful questions at an academic seminar, but it's not on top of the mind of politicians. Professors know answers to it. But professors also have another habit, which can be at times a little bit bad. We are adjusting to reality. You see, I prefer to stand straight up and not to be stooping. And all you technicians always put the microphone too low. And it's transnational. It doesn't apply. There's nothing anti-American in what I'm saying. It's universal. It applies to technicians. Thank you so much. Thank you. So, we are at a stage now where I am in a sense saying that academics have to take one more step. And I'll tell you what the step is. To grow from diagnosis to prognosis and therapy. To be willing to make forecasting and to be willing to come up with proposals. You don't impose, you propose. It's the difference between those 2 words. There was a table number 10 for ladies. Now, in that particular culture, they had a separate table. And the first day was spent on exercises, and I said with my Canadian colleagues, there is one word that you are not permitted to pronounce today. It's the word Afghanistan. I'll give you a lot of tasks to solve. And I got a lot of conflicts to solve. And you start with the definition of conflict. Anglo-Americans are very bad at it. They have a tendency to confuse conflict with violence. Now we have 2 different words, one starting with C-O-N and the other with V-I-O, because they're 2 different ideas. Violence is to hurt and harm. Conflict is confligrare. Something is shocking with something. What? Goals with goals. Incompatible goals. I want something, you want something, it doesn't go together. This may lead to violence, it may also lead to transcendence. To going beyond, going one step further, create something new. Look at history backward, and I can read you history as creative handling of conflict. What was the conflict behind this innovation? What was the incompatibility. That somebody or somebody together handled brilliantly. Okay, we're back to a day in February 2001, 7 months before 9/11. Problem, Afghanistan. How do I as a mediator try to approach something like that? I have a 4-point agenda. I always start with the positive future, the constructive. What does the Afghanistan look like where you would like to live? Your positive image. What does the marriage look like that you would like to be a party to? Not with him! Lady, could we wait a little bit with that one? I promise you we'll come to it and what happened yesterday, but could you be so kind to tell me your ideal image of a marriage? It was all hypocrisy. Let's wait with that one a little bit. So number 2 is reality. What happened yesterday. Number 3 are the positive things from the past. Was there a good period? The Afghans talk about the golden period. Number 4, what are you most afraid of? Afghans that the Americans will stay forever. Americans that we cannot withdraw with honor. We'll come back to that. So let us say you have an agenda, you do it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, and each time it becomes richer and deeper, and they come closer to a solution. Instead of psychoanalysts concentrating on what happened when you were 3 years old, and your mother discovered that you were playing with your genitals under the quilt, what happened then? Which is a delicious thing for psychoanalysts. They can feed on that for ages. Much better question. What kind of person would you like to be in 3 years? Positive psychology. I'm not discarding psychoanalysis. I'm just saying that you start with anchoring the mediation in something positive. Dear United States, what is your ideal image of the Americas, the whole thing? Dear Latin America, what's your ideal image of the Americas, the whole thing? 2 days ago I was teaching in Buenos Aires. That was the major part. I'll come back to that, if we have time. But the point about it now is Afghanistan. So what did I say? Well, in order to find out what I said, we had the good luck that we had Taliban in the room. You know, another basic thing in mediation, you talk with everybody. And I talked with quite a lot of everybody. So I talked with Taliban, Al-Qaeda people, State Department, Pentagon, just to mention some people. They have slightly different views of Afghanistan, to put it that way. Now, I haven't found anybody in my 60 years experience who doesn't have a point that makes some sense. You pick up that point and you build on that one. So the first thing you do is mapping of the conflict by identifying the actors, their goals, and the incompatibilities. How do you do that? Dialogue. The second thing you do is to look at the legitimacy of their goals. You test it in terms of law, human rights, basic needs. All of them enter. The third thing you do is the tricky thing, is to try to make the jump, the bridge between legitimate goals, to make an image of a future in which everybody could feel there is that of me in it. This is not win-win, that's a vulgar form. Win-win means only that all the parties agree to it. You don't have any solution if the parties don't agree to it. So it's a ridiculous triviality. Agreement, acceptability, and sustainability is the definition of a solution. But there's something more to it. What we call transcendence. Go beyond, introduce something new. Why something new? Why can't you do with the old? Because if the old could accommodate them, they would have found it. You have to introduce something new. Like a zone where two states manage a territory together. And maybe they make a natural park by planting the seeds of trees. Because no country so far has been known to go to war over what kind of tree you plant. Countries, our states, are fairly stupid at times, but not that one. Well, they changed it into a joint economic zone, and it has been an amazing success. And not one single murder afterwards, no revenge, no nothing. And young people in Ecuador and Peru don't even know that there was a war. They just take that zone for granted. But let me jump back to Afghanistan. Back to Afghanistan, where did we go? Well, after 4 days, we came up with a 5-point formula. But I think before that, I would like to tell you and share with you what the Taliban said. So you sit down with the Taliban, they look surprisingly human. And you ask them, what does the Afghanistan look like where you would like to live? And they tell you by and large 3 things. Point 1, no secularization. This is a Muslim country and it will remain like that. We don't accept wells and water that is not blessed by Allah. Nor do we accept schools. Our enemy is secularism. And we have a lot of countries occupying us right now, spreading secularism. They didn't say that in February 2011, so I'm adding something they said afterwards. Point 2. We hate Kabul. This is not a unitary nation state in the Western sense. This is a collection of 25,000 autonomous villages and 8 nations. The autonomy of the villages and the autonomy of the nations, it was has kept us going. And that is what has made us survive. Point 3, will the West please stop invading us? Playing chess games, or whatever they call it. Everybody knows the t-shirt, welcome to Afghanistan, the place where empires go to die. The US empire is dying in that one. Before that, the United Kingdom empire, invading in 1848, 1878, 1919. The Soviet Empire invading in 1979, dying. Welcome to Afghanistan, the place where empires go to die. The tomb for number 3, the US Empire, is open. You're just waiting for the coffin and all that. That'll come. I'll go a little bit more into that. Although I will open now in about 3-4 minutes the way out for US. Highly unlikely, but I'll open it. That's my task. My task is not to be against anybody, but to open ways of doing it. Okay, the Taliban have 3 goals. Islam, what we could call a loose federation. And number 3, no longer to be invaded. And I, as a mediator, asked the question to myself that any mediator would ask, what does this Afghanistan remind me of? And the answer is, of course, obvious. To anybody who knows anything about international affairs, Switzerland. 2,300 quite independent communities with local democracy, direct democracy. 4 nations. What's been their policy? Neutrality, federation, and good relations to the neighbors. Because with one exception, you have German speaking outside, French speaking outside, Italian speaking outside. The Afghans are very similar. They have one nation which is only Afghan, Hazara. The other 7 have their counterparts outside. So what's the formula for peace? Neutrality. No foreign bases. Admitting no bases to anybody. A loose federation inside. The capital not in Kabul but in a smaller place. And a Central Asian community of Afghanistan, of course with Pakistan, with open borders. So that the borders is eliminated by being open. And the Pashtuns can do what they want, move freely between them. And not be called tribal area Waziristan or something like that, some kind of derogatory terms. But be treated with dignity. You would of course have in it the 5 former Central Asian republics of the Soviet Union, Iran, Pakistan, and Azad Kashmir, the Pakistani part of Kashmir. And you would have a Central Asian community of 9 countries. This is not on Washington's agenda. On whose agenda is it? From Ankara to Beijing. The ball is not in Washington, the ball is in somebody else's court. So I sit in, say, Sam Rayburn building next to the US Congress, just 100 yards away. There is a tunnel between the building, which is the office building, and the Congress, and the secretary says, "Run, run, run! The vote is in 2 minutes." And that's why they are in quite good shape, because they're running quite often. So you find them by and large in good shape. It's a marvelous system, this tunnel system, to keep in shape. So that is really a positive point about US democracy. Now, I sit there in a room, I won't tell you who organized it, but with some Congress representatives, and I present this. I present a 5-point plan, which is, as a matter of fact, identical with the plan we developed in February 2001. Coalition government with Taliban, and the Taliban decide themselves who to send. It's not a question of somebody judging moderate or extreme. Point 2, a loose federation. Point 3, a community with neighboring countries, like the European community. Of course, with a non-nuclear, with a nuclear-free zone, that's obvious, they already have it. Mainly. Point 4, a basic needs-oriented policy for all the 8 nations and the 2 genders. Food and water, clothes and housing, health and education. And at this point today, the Taliban are admitting having made terrible mistakes. But they're also saying we don't want to be told about those mistakes by Americans and by feminists, and particularly not by American feminists. We want to be told about those mistakes by our brothers and sisters. And the most progressive country, among the 57 countries in the Organization of the Islamic Coming Community, is Tunisia. And that's why you saw so many girls and women when the Arab Spring started in Tunisia. They were already liberated by Bourguiba in 1956-57. Leaving that aside, they want their inspiration, and this leads us to point 5. Peacekeeping in Afghanistan. It's a very violent country, extremely violent. I was there afterwards at a session organized by the Minister of Education on peace education. And I asked for some examples of it. What just one example? How violent are you? And the minister, she said, well, I'll give you one example. You are driving on the highway, somebody is overtaking you. It's a clear insult. How do you react to that? Well, that's why you have a pistol in the glove compartment. You take out the pistol, open the window, and shoot out the back tires. And I said, isn't it a little bit extreme? Well, not according to their norms. How much time between the insult and the violent reaction? She said about 5 seconds. So it doesn't leave much time for mediation, to put it that way. Because mediation is a little bit complicated. We'll have workshops tomorrow on conflict resolution, and the day after tomorrow on reconciliation. It's a good theme for the Sunday. Now, having said that, then I asked her, what happens if you don't shoot out those tires? Take them out. And she said, somebody will say, you are not the man. And I said, this one I've heard about before. That one I know. This thing about, shooting out the back tires is a little bit extreme, but you're not the man I've heard about. Bang, bang, bang. All you people in the room, will you please design a formula, not more than 4 words? What do you say when somebody says that? And the gold medal went to so what? The silver medal was a little bit beyond 4 words, and those of you who speak Spanish will recognize it. That's your problem, not my problem. A little bit more than 4 words, but it can be pronounced quickly. So it has to be within the 5 seconds. Now, the Minister of Education was extremely complimentary about that, because some of this has to do with verbal formulations. We come back to the issue again, peace in Afghanistan. The congressman said, this solution you are talking about, Professor Galtung, sounds interesting, but it's not what our voters are interested in. They're not interested in solving anything. They're interested in victory, the V word. Well, there you have an American predicament. The love affair with the military. Understandable, you started that way. And the love affair became so deep that you were even able to kill each other. 2 militaries in one country. The love affair is still there. Where does it come from? About that there are many theories. I'll just share a couple with you. Let me share one particularly. If you look at religious orientation in the world, the 3 countries with most belief in God are the Philippines, Poland, and the United States. The country with most belief in Satan is the United States of America. That Satan is active, working on a 724 basis and interfering in your daily life. My wife and I, my Japanese beloved wife and I, we were driving this morning from Athens, Georgia. We didn't see much about Satan, but we got the message that Jesus loves the unborn. Now, that means there is one way of being safe in America, never to be born. So that's one approach to peace, and to Jim's problem of violence prevention. So transcend those damn 9 months, make it 1929 or something of the kind. There must be methods for doing that. It didn't say Jesus also loves the born. Because if Jesus is represented by the US Army, it doesn't look like that. Now this is called dualism dilemma. The division of the world in 2, Manichaeism. One is good, one is bad. One is divine, one is satanic. And if you think you are chosen by God and are exceptional and above the law, then there is only one question remaining, since Satan comes in many garbs. It's to identify the Satan of the week, of the year, of the season. And that's going on. It's called security studies. And security studies is institutionalized paranoia. It's also known as an academic discipline. Institutionalized paranoia. How about instead of that, building peace? Mutual and equitable. How about United States promoting that Central Asian community? Promoting neutrality. Helping with that federation. US is also a federation, but a fake one. It's done on rectangularization, straight lines. A real US federation will have 6 parts. The Inuits, the Hawaiians, the so-called Hispanics or Chicanos, the First Nations, the African Americans, and the WASPs. Now, if you have a male, white, Southern WASP, he votes for Romney. And if he is not that, or the person is not that, the likelihood to vote for Obama is very high. So we now come to the speech for Obama on 20 January. And I'll finish my talk with some points about that speech. Dear Barack Obama, you start with fellow Americans. You may say at the end, God bless America, but let everybody have his own interpretation of what that means. What do you say between the two? Afghanistan. We made mistakes. We didn't understand it. We didn't understand the Pashtun urge for unity. We didn't understand their strong striving for autonomy of the village, of the nation. Yes, they are poor and they want to become less poor. We didn't understand that they had been invaded more than enough. We would like to join with Ankara, Beijing, Tehran, in promoting a Central Asian community and establish an equitable relation. You have wonderful resources, we have a couple of knowledge that might be useful for you. We have a base in Bagwan. We'll cancel that one. We have a pipeline from the Caspian to the Indian Ocean. That oil is for you people in the region to process. We will change to becoming self-sufficient by 2030 by having our own hydrocarbons. And we'll cooperate with you. Dear Latin America, you're doing today the same as we did in 1775 onwards, when we were revolting against red-shirted English soldiers on a certain road in Massachusetts. And in 76 we made a declaration of independence, very similar to the kind of declarations you are making. We get the message of the airport of Buenos Aires that the passengers are divided into 3 lines. Line number 1, Mercosur, the United States of Southern Latin America. Quick. Latin 2, ordinary people, like Norwegians traveling to give lectures. Line number 3, for Americans, Canadians and Australians, you have to pay the reciprocity fee. The same amount that those 3 countries ask for your visas. You enter without visa, but you pay the same amount. Reciprocity. Now, a couple of years ago, that would be unthinkable. Dear Latin Americans, we get the message. We will not repeat the stupidity of George III and his successors and continue fighting you for more than 30 years. We will not do that. We invite you, we celebrate your independence, your United States of Latin America and the Caribbean with 33 countries. And we suggest that the Organization of American States will be a dialogue forum on the basis of equity between our 2 Americas for mutual and equal cooperation. We develop sensitivity with your feelings. We try to see how you see the world. We'll stop our interference in Honduras and Paraguay. We will withdraw our forces. And we will, of course, invite you together with us to certify the decrease in demand, as you together with us will certify the decrease in supply. It's a joint task on an equitable basis. We've done, 93 military interventions in Latin America. We would like to have our historians have a little look at those 93. There may have been arguments for them, but by and large, we wish them undone. Now, the speech is not very likely, and I can continue around the world. I could come to the Korean part of it. We realize that the conflict is not between South and North Korea. It's between North Korea and us. The first directive I'll make is an executive decision to normalize relations with North Korea. A peace treaty with diplomatic relations. And I can assure you that everything will follow. Now about Iran, it has been brought to my attention, and I know it, that some words of distance from what we did in 1953 together with our colleagues, CIA and MI6, making a pushing out of power, the first experiment in electoral democracy in Iran. I understand you were so proud that you had achieved it, and the reward you got from us was that we pushed him out, Mossadegh. Wish it was undone. Wish we could undo it. And my second directive is that we will sit down together. You are the biggest potential exporter of hydrocarbons in the world. We are the biggest net importer. And design a world with less use of hydrocarbons together. Well, I say the speech is not the most likely. It may also be that somebody would pull the plug for the TV. May also be that the last thing you would hear on the P would be bang! Somebody has a pistol. By the compliments of the National Rifle Association. Is equipped for that one? Maybe. There have been endings like that before. But I'll end with the following words. If the US did this, everybody would love America. Thank you.